Well, hello everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar today, The Coming Retail Returns Tsunami. My name is Greg Busick. Many of you know me from different webinars we've done there. Some of you are new. We've got a lot of international folks here today, so we're thankful that you're here, and we're thankful that you're taking your time out of your day to spend time with us today. We've got three others with us today. First of all, we've got Lee Holman. Say hi, Lee.
Hey guys.
Jerry Sheldon.
Howdy.
And then doing sign language today, we've got Darlene Masters.
Hello.
So, hey, Darlene, thank you. As always, with these webinars, we're so thankful to our sponsors who made the research possible for things. So first of all, Appriss Retail, who has solutions related to return fraud in particular. Centiro, that works a lot with the area of reverse logistics. Microsoft, obviously, that's involved in a lot of other areas in all areas of retail, as well as our research partner, Loss Prevention Research Council, who's joined us here to talk about with the returns of the losses that are related to things on the returns. So with that, just a little bit of housekeeping. Today, we're going to have Q&A, as always, down in the right corner of your of the little bar that comes with the webinar thing. You'll see a thing, that opportunity to ask questions. The number one question asked all the time is, will the slides and the recordings be available? Yes, they will be available about 2 hours after our presentation today on our website at ihlservices.com. If you go down to the analyst corner, you'll see a thing that says webinar replay for the Coming Retail Return Tsunami. Those slides and everything will be there. We're going to talk about some forecast data here, the data details there for our IHL clients. Those will be on the portal later today, early tomorrow, with the updated numbers that we have for that. So with that, let's start just talking globally about some things that are going with specific. Oh, I'm sorry, and I messed up. We've got a poll before we get started. Go ahead, Lee. Pop that poll up there.
All right, you should have it on your screen right now.
Go ahead. Which statement best describes the status of shopping at retailers labeled non-essential where you live? Curbside only, you're open, but you have limits on the number of people that can come into the stores, or you're fully open but subject to the national or local social distancing rules? And those results are coming in. Go ahead and share those results there, Lee. So there you see it, and I can't actually see them. Can you read that out, Lee, what we're seeing?
I can do that. The top response was open, but with limits on the number of people in stores or hours at 40%. Curbside only was at 33%, and fully open but subject to local or national social distancing at 27%.
Okay, so we've got, what was that, 62%? Was that 42 and 27?
40% for open but with limits, and 27 for fully open.
So 67% of our audience lives in an area where you can actually walk into a store, and the remaining folks cannot there. That's interesting. That helped me frame things as I look at the stuff worldwide. So let's go ahead back to the deck there. And okay, moving forward, as I was starting there before. So EMEA, the major countries, I just want to go around the world and just kind of give you an update of what's going on around the world. In Germany, we have soccer. It's back, returned with no fans in the stands. It's been there for a couple weeks. Germany will recover faster, we believe, than just about any European country from COVID-19 and the impact there. France, things are looking up, although there's a huge economic dip there. The numbers of deaths and cases have flattened significantly there. United Kingdom is just starting to open right about now, and was closed for a longer time than most economies, and that's going to be tougher. But when you have a prime minister that is in the hospital from COVID-19, that's, I guess, more understood as a result of that. Italy, which was hit extremely hard, has now reopened the borders, and their factory activity is contracted in May less than they expected, which is positive. But they certainly need a lot of tourism in Italy there to help their economy. Spain as well is open. They're looking for soccer and need the tourists there. And then Russia's got the double whammy of COVID, and as well as the fuel war. And as a result, that's been devastating to their economy there. When we look at Asia, China has had mixed signs of recovery there that have been happening. There's been little pockets of outbreaks that have occurred because of travelers coming back in for that. Overall, their economic return has been slower than been expected. People have been less likely to come back to stores. In India, right now, we're still seeing the peak infection rate is coming right now. There's a little bit of unknown about in India, but we're still expecting their economy to grow this year. In Japan, same drug that Russia's using, Avavir, I think it's called, that is showing promise, like what is it, Rezef? I figure what the word is, the one for we have
Remdesivir.
for Remdesivir. That's right. Thanks, Jerry. For the in the U.S. that's being used with great promise. South Korea, baseball is really popular here. They've gone to their third stimulus, 29 billion. There have been added, and they've got some hot spots where they've opened up nightclubs and things where things COVID has popped back up. But they're still projecting economic growth going into the end of 2020. Vietnam has had no deaths from COVID. Their businesses and schools are open. Taiwan has had, and Hong Kong have had very few deaths, and both are expecting their economies to grow. So let's look a little bit now at Latin and South America, where COVID-19 is just now starting to grow as we move to wintertime or close late fall to winter in Latin and South America. These guys are getting hit probably harder than just about anybody other than the oil-rich countries in EMEA. Mexico, mainly because the tourism is down dramatically, as well as oil. Brazil, the same thing, oil as well as tourism, and their industrial output has dropped significantly. Colombia, which was coming back and getting great tourism, and actually U.S. retirees that were relocating to Colombia, that is slowed down dramatically because of COVID. Chile, Argentina, Peru, and then we have Venezuela. Lots of challenges there. We'll get into each of these countries a little bit later. I want to spend a lot more time, though, looking at North America in particular. We've got some encouraging data from the states that have reopened. Obviously, there's a concern still about a second wave. The recovery is very different by state. We're going to talk about that. The latest civil unrest that has happened as a result of the death murder of George Floyd has made a big impact and is affecting those states that are trying to reopen their downtowns. A lot of restaurants who are trying to reopen, and stores are now being shut or on a curfew as a result of that. We'll talk about that. Canada in particular, very interesting approach, and we're going to talk a little bit how they're similar to the US but different. They have used for reopening what they call a double bubble approach. This is not about the bubble gum there, but it is about the fact that you start with the family group as the first bubble, and then you go to a second extended family bubble there as a step to move to open. And that is proven well in most of the provinces that don't have the large cities. That has been a nice approach that's happened there, but it's a little bit different, say in Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal. It's been slower to open there. So let's look at the data specific to retail so that we can look at that. over time. As you can see, this particular data here, this is from Womply. It's mostly smaller retailers, but it shows the retail overall, what's happening in terms of daily average revenue year to year. And so you're starting to see a piece of this that is pent up demand that is coming back into the marketplace now from where we were at our minimum here in of minus 22.8% in looks about late April for that. As well, if we go one more slide further, this is looking at retail, this is dollar spending, and it shows you the dollar spending there is still down a minus 11% overall where we're at right now. And that's simply because not every place is open, as we saw. The curbside only for retail, that's just not going to work for a tourist shop or a seasonal place, where somebody usually would walk in a store and look at clothing or t-shirts, and they're not going to be able to do that right now. What about restaurants? Several things looking up in terms of restaurant and hospitality. So we see a growth rate here in terms of overall restaurants. This is quick service. So quick service has rebounded to being down about 15% overall. Most dining rooms are still not open nationwide when it comes to fast food. And then your full service restaurants are down still about 40% compared to last year. This is probably the single most challenged group of anybody in your traditional retail areas, with the exception of your hotels. If we looked at the numbers overall for hotels and Airbnbs, we would see that that has greatly been hampered by the lack of travel and tourism to be expected there. Then we have, what are consumers doing with all that stimulus cash and the money that has come out? Are they spending it on retail, or have they been able to spend it on retail? So let's first of all look at the categories that they've increased spending on. So if you look at this, no surprise, 57% of consumers are spending more on groceries, 53% more on cleaning products, snacks, foods. As you can see, most of these things fit into the retail market for things here. I thought it was interesting that charities even up 19%, at least according to the people that Ameritrade surveyed. That is not true for all charities, but certainly if those are related to COVID-19, that makes sense that those would be up. Now let's take a look at the savings rate. Oh wow, savings rate has spiked. And if you recall, if you were part of our webinars a few weeks ago when we did our own little survey of folks of what they plan to do with the stimulus money, they took it and most people said they were going to save it. And the data has proven that to be true. 33% the savings rate, the spike in savings rate through April of this year. So a lot of people have put that money the government's given them into the bank, which isn't great for the economy right now. But it does show some things. And let's take a look at why that is. And partly it's because the limitations on what they're able to spend the money on and being able to get out. So 78% of the survey said that they've had savings when it comes to going out. Well, you can't go out with your friends and eat out. If you remember correctly, and we'll get into this a little bit later, restaurants were booming as of February. They were going great. And so this has dropped considerably. Not going on vacation, big chunk, not making a big purchase, cars in particular, but even the big box electronics and things, if you don't have to make those decisions, people have been holding that back until they have some, till those stores are open in particular, or they can make better decisions based on what they feel health-wise for their particular family. Now let's talk about the new challenge. We've had COVID. We've had lots of things in terms of reopens that are starting to occur across the country there. So we said 67% of our audience where you can walk into a store, but now we've got the challenges that have come because of protests and in some cases riots in mostly large cities that have occurred that have affected the openings of stores that were just trying to be open for the first time. So this is a new challenge that retailers are having to face, particularly retailers that are based in inner cities. Target has announced upwards of 200 stores that have either closed or restricted hours. CVS mentioned a number, it was like an abnormal number of stores that were damaged due to riots and lootings that occurred with these protests. Those are just added challenges that are now coming into the mix for retailers as they look to reopen. So economically, when we look at our data, we have to factor that in as we look at what's the recovery opportunity moving forward. So then we had the stimuluses and the lockdowns and just different, and there's different things happening in different countries, and it's affecting how we would look at things going forward. As we've mentioned previously, you can go back to our other webinars, the PPP, the unemployment things together, they're just an absolute mess at what's happened in our economy. And you see that played out in terms of the unemployment rate. So this is the rise of unemployment since February. We're going to have some new numbers coming out tomorrow. Their ADP numbers yesterday were pretty positive, that in the private sector payroll that a lot of people are coming back to jobs, and the unemployment numbers are coming down dramatically, which is some positive news there. But you'll notice the difference by country, and this is pretty significant here. The US approach, as we talked about, had the PPP, which was to incentivize small businesses to keep their employees. The unemployment piece of the CARES Act was to give people who were unemployed extra money. And when those things get combined, it becomes a real mess. And then you add the third part of that, you incentivize the banks on those PPP loans to do the larger companies first, even though you told the American people that you were going to do it first come, first serve, because the incentive to the banks was that it was 5% of the loan value. So they chose their largest customers first because of that commission rate. The end result is it just became a total mess in terms of how it was rolled out, and they're still trying to fix things now. Now, one of the things that's real positive this week for anybody that's applied for the PPP, the forgiveness time has been expanded. The president still has to sign it, but both the House and Senate signed it yesterday, and extended the number of weeks, I believe, to 24 weeks that you can show that your payroll to be able to get forgiveness for those pieces, which is a big deal because you were able to apply for 10 weeks of payroll, but you only had 8 weeks to return it. So that a lot of people turned that down or felt like they were really risking not being able to pay that loan back if they took that money. But when it comes to unemployment, it's been a real mess. Our unemployment is extremely high, which is very different to what we see in most of Europe. Germany and France, in particular, had existing programs in place. And what they did is they simply guaranteed 90% of the payroll for those employers. And that way they were able to keep those people employed. The end result is that their economies will, when they reopen and people are able to shop, will come back faster, and will not have as a deep of a drop as we're seeing in the US. The other piece of that to consider, though, is we don't expect there to be a bump as much in those economies going forward, but rather a steady increase back to where we were in 2019. We expect in the US it to be more of a boomerang or a Nike swoosh kind of effect at different levels of speed based on the nature of that business. Related to unemployment, retail and hospitality got hit hard here. I believe it was over 50% of all of the unemployment statistics as of May were in the industries that we're talking about today, retail and hospitality there. And that's a big thing. But I mentioned the unemployment benefits, and it really comes down to what's happening with wage replacement rates for folks in our industry. As you'll notice, generally retail workers make between $11 and $15 an hour. There's a couple others that are down here, higher chefs, etc. But when it comes to store-based employees, they're in the $11 to $15 an hour. Well, under unemployment, with the $600 extra that the U.S. government has given, these guys are making anywhere from 140%, I believe, up to over 200% for what they were making before, because they added $15 an hour to their salary and unemployment, which has made it really, really difficult for small businesses in particular to get workers back that they furloughed or unemployed. And that's where the disconnect with the PPP has come into place. Now, when we look at this in terms of how big and how many people are in that market, you'll see that combined retail, accommodation, and food service is by far the biggest industry that is affected, but also, once again, ranging from 140% all the way up to 190% of their salaries by being not working and being unemployed versus being employed. And this differs by state. So this is just a brief note to look at the data with regards to full replacement rates of there. So previous to the CARES Act, in hourly wage, you got about 50% of your hourly wage in Washington, California, Mississippi, and that went down as your wage went up. As you can see over on the right, for these states, the wage to break even to 100% goes to a much higher rate there, and for a much longer time related to that on that data. So it's not 50%, it's 100%, and it's all the way up to $40 an hour, which was 50% there. So that gives you an idea of what's going on. How does it apply specifically to retail? And this gets us into looking at the malls and store closings. This chart is extremely scary, and it's the amount of mall space, existing mall space, that are held by department stores and apparel in particular. And many of these companies are struggling and closing stores, but 25% of the U.S. mall space is held by companies that are struggling in some manner. And the exception is Target and Walmart. Although they're closing a few stores, they're opening stores as well. A lot of these retailers here are in deep trouble. AMC Theaters doesn't know if they're going to be able to survive the year because people are not going back to theaters. Certainly, JCPenney has applied for bankruptcy, and others in here. So that's a big problem. What is it in total though? And we've done our own research. So everything to date has been everybody else's research and to what we're doing here. And this is IHL's research from the data. We're estimating, unfortunately, that 313,000 stores are going to go under in 2020 due to COVID-19 and a little bit related to the unrest that we're seeing here. This is up from the 299,000 that we showed in our last webinar for two reasons. A little bit because of the riots and the civil unrest that may be affecting some. But the bigger thing is many states, and we'll get into that in a second, didn't open their seasonal businesses before Memorial Day. And that's kind of the kiss of death for a lot of those seasonal businesses, small seasonal businesses in those regions. Most of these closures are going to be small businesses. I believe this is 280,000 roughly of the stores are going to close there. If we look at it as a percentage of the overall numbers here, it's about 9% of the one store companies and about 10.5%, 10.6% for the 2 to 9 store chains. And that's where the greatest amount is. In terms of overall closings for enterprise folks that are above 50 or more stores, we're looking at about 25,000, 28,000, I believe, in the, if I go back to the previous slide, about 28,000 store closings for the enterprise folks. So when you see the core site data and our data, we're a few different segments there, but roughly the same in our projections for that enterprise data. Our big growth is that we go down to the mom and pop size, and that's where most of the damage is going to occur with retail. When we look at it by segments, Here's your general retail at 27,890. This is most likely to compare to our friends at Coresight retail. In terms of the food, drug, convenience, and mass merchant market, they're increasing stores. So Dollar General has come out and said they're adding 1,000 stores there, and so very, very good news there in terms of what's going on, particularly for the larger folks. And then for the general retail is where most of the hits are, as well as the hospitality chains. But it's different by state. And I'm just going to skip through for the sake of time. You can go through the methodology here. What I wanted to show you graphically, and this was not meant to be a political chart, we tried 30 different color combinations, and the red blue came out with the best contrast to show states that were open or states that were closed. So what we did is we went through and looked at each state and the percentage of how long they were closed completely, how long they were closed at 25%, 50%, 75%, or totally open between March 31st and July 31st. And from that, based on the procedures and what we're seeing so far, tried to map out what is the total months of shutdown and what is the impact on stores. So you can see in places like Michigan and Illinois, which have high seasonal businesses there, Massachusetts is up there as well, New Jersey is up there as well, over 3 months equivalent of lockdown when you go through the policies and the speed at which things are reopening there. And the biggest thing, as I mentioned, for those store numbers is those seasonal businesses in those areas could not open fully before Memorial Day. And most are still not open fully. And as a result, a big portion of their summer, which is short anyway, is lost. And that business is lost. And we just believe that many retailers are just not going to be able to recover and during that time. How does that work to percentage of stores within the state? And this is the part that when you look at it is so devastating. In Michigan, as much as 15% of all their retail locations we predict are going to go under. And once again, most of those, probably 90% of those, are going to be small businesses. But we just think the policies in these states have been, for the sake of health, have been so damaging to small retailers that we're projecting negative there. And I'll show you why California is not quite as high here. So this is the total number of stores and the total amount of retail lost. California is the largest by far, $45 billion we believe lost in terms of total stores there. When you get to the overall look at things, it comes out to be 197,000 stores lost through just these 10 states. The one thing that California has done to not make it worse is the fact that they have a senior meal plan where small seniors, instead of Meals on Wheels, they can order from restaurants up to 3 meals a day, and it's got to be small restaurants. And so that has helped bring business in that otherwise wouldn't be there as far as takeout. Now let's look at retail overall and just get a little bit of history of what's going on. This is US Census data and our cut of that census data. This is where we were at the year end of 2019. We were up 3.5% for the year. We had especially soft goods and specialty hard goods were down, but department stores were up for the year. And then we got to February of this year and everybody was up and things were just growing really, really fast, up 7.5% for the month. And things were really booming. And then COVID happened and you start seeing the red happen, particularly for the mall-based stores and the restaurants there. Now, this data doesn't include the hotels and casinos, et cetera, there. That would be a much larger down here. And then April data, it got even more red there, with especially soft goods dropping as much as 89% overall. So where are we today as a year-to-date total year? We've got some segments that are up. Our pure play, our grocery stores are up. Our drugs and cosmetics are about flat here. Part of the reason for that is we've had closures. This does not include the cannabis stores in these numbers, which would be up significantly as a result, but it does include the Sephoras and the Ulta Beauties that saw a deep drop in their numbers, which has brought down whatever gain that would be occurring through the regular drugstores that are out there. As well, when you start to look at the challenge for department stores, especially soft goods, et cetera, it's a pretty big hole to climb out of. We think there's going to be recovery there. This is our latest update. For those of you who have been following us, we dropped 0.1% in our projections here, down to 7% negative for the year. Now, this includes a broader sense, including the casinos and the cruises and the lodging as well. But we made some small changes when it came to specialty hard goods, mainly because the policies of Home Depot and Best Buy. For Best Buy has continued to be by appointment only, and that's there. For the sake of time, I'm going to rush through just very briefly looking at the world, the rest of the world here. These will all be in the deck. EMEA down about 680, I think, $billion. I'm sorry, that's not true. About $277 billion total from 2019 by the time we're over there. There's the data on the individual countries. Time doesn't allow me to go through that. So when you get the deck, we'll go through that. In Asia, down about 276 billion there. LATAM only down 82 billion, much smaller economy there. Overall, worldwide, total impact there from 2019 is about $997 billion. It's about a total retail loss. So this doesn't include pure play. This doesn't include some of the pieces that are overall in the broader region there. Overall retail loss, we're projecting over $1.5 trillion of loss to retail due to shutdowns and the impact of COVID-19 around the world. So it's a pretty heavy impact there overall. So just to give you a view of those things. Now, real quickly, I want to talk about the transfer of wealth that has occurred. This is particularly acute when you look at the segments in particular. So there's been money that's transferred from essentially mall-based retailers or non-essential retailers of about $285 billion worldwide to the food, drug, mass merchants, and convenience stores there worldwide. But the bigger issue that we're seeing is the devastating move of the impact and the move of that money from small companies and small businesses to the large companies. Walmart, Costco, Target, et cetera, were allowed to be open because they sold food, but they also sold sporting goods. They also sold books. They sold clothing. And those small retailers that sold those items weren't allowed to be open during the same period. So we've had this massive transfer of wealth that has occurred there. For recovery, overall, this light blue line here, recovery we're showing right now, we're targeting about first quarter of 2022 in North America before we can get back to things. And as a result of that, or get back to our where we were in 2019, it's going to be much tougher when it comes to those guys who saw the deepest drops in restaurants and in the department stores. We expect the restaurants to come back considerably faster than we see with the department stores or the specialty stores. There's going to be a lot of bloodletting in that area. In the restaurants, I think the penchant for people to want to eat out is going to continue. The speed of recovery, there's several things here that determine whether or not your state is going to recover faster, as we've mentioned a little bit, but I want to talk about two things. First, there was I mentioned in the previous slide, the ineptness of your state and local unemployment. And part of that is the fact that $67 billion of unemployment benefits that should have gone to people who are unemployed have not been able to make it out of the states to those folks yet. And as a result, those people are more likely to come back to work because they haven't gotten the extra money that we shared a little bit later. I will tell you that on an individual retailer basis, it's how strictly you adhere to the social distancing protocols that will in the near term determine how fast you come back from this. And to illustrate this, these were first quarter numbers, actual numbers here, and show the difference between retailers. And we're talking really the last 2 weeks of March that really played a huge role here. Costco was very quick to limit the number of people in their stores during the peak buying period that surged in March. Their same store sales were up about 8%. Sam's and Walmart were about 4 days later when it came to opening. Their sales were up significantly higher. These are same store sales for the total quarter were up 3 to 4% total in those categories, simply as a result of how fast or how strict social distancing was put in place there. There is a major difference between Lowe's and Home Depot. Lowe's, where I live, never limited the number of people into their stores during the period. Home Depot did. And I can just say personally, my first choice is Home Depot because it's closer. I drive there and multiple times there's a line outside and I left because of that. Long term, this could be beneficial. Short term, could be very, very difficult for these retailers to recover. The one I'm most concerned about is Best Buy. Here we are into the second quarter. The second quarter, we have literally gone past 2 months of the second quarter, and you can't go into a Best Buy without an appointment today. And I've seen people that want to buy things, appliances and TVs, and they're asking for stores that you can go into that don't have an appointment. That's a problem when it comes to Best Buy and their second quarter earnings related to that there. So that's it for the economic update until our point of our main part of our survey today, or our research today, and that's about the coming retail return tsunami. And it's just gotten larger. The last time we did this was 2015. And it was 643 billion was the cost worldwide due to returns. We estimate the end of 2019, it's over $1 trillion for returns because of the growth that we've seen in online there. This doesn't even factor in the COVID stuff. You know, returns are critical. 86% of customers, according to the Centiro Blue Yonder study that they did, 86% of customers said they look for retailers that have easy returns, and 81% will switch to competitors if they have a bad experience when it comes to returns. When you add COVID into that, when we look at the data, we look at the reasons for the data, the segments, the sales, all of that stuff, we're estimating that retailers could see as much as $200 billion in returns in the next 30 to 60 days because of the lockdown and not being able to do returns that has occurred there, which brings up a whole bunch of issues, the first of which being return fraud. Whenever you have chaos, you have crime. There's also a saying that says, where there's mystery, there's margin. And when it comes to fraud and return fraud, COVID brings an excellent opportunity for people to come in the midst of the masses to create fraud and steal things from one store and have them delivered to another store there. The ability for you to identify that, having systems in place to identify that and eliminate that, is pretty crucial for your business. When you look at taking things back, what do you do in a pandemic? What do you take back? That's the first step that most retailers are having to deal with. Are there things you're not going to take back? Yeah, most places aren't taking back the hoarding items that occurred in March and April. The paper towels, the cleaning supplies, all that sort of stuff are not taking those back. But the thing is how do you handle the crowds with this mass of people that want to come back to the store? So you're going to have the population or the numbers of people coming in basically as if it was post-Christmas for returns. But now you've got to manage social distancing protocols, and you also have to figure out, how do I do this when I didn't have a big run up in my business beforehand, when it came to a big season like a Christmas season, where financially I've got those numbers. So those are some of the things that retailers are facing, and they're very real issues that are going on right now. So there's the crowd piece of it, but there's also the financial aspect of it. How do you survive retail overall with COVID, but how do you survive when now you have this drain due to returns that are coming in there? How do you keep everybody safe from your employees and things there? This is a Target store that opened their returns quietly. This is out west in the Montana area. You can see the plexiglass shields and things that are there, the masks. This particular Target store, they had a Starbucks store next to it. They've shut down the Starbucks, and they put the returns and started loading up the returns into that Starbucks area to prepare for the numbers that are coming back for returns in that area. So you've got all of these challenges when it comes to returns. How do you deal with them? And just some examples of some folks and what they're doing. So American Eagle Outfitters, they've gone to contactless return bins. So they're having returns at the store, their store, but it's kind of a scan and drop the item there, so it's contactless. So the associates aren't even touching the items and being near the associate when those returns occur. In Europe, there's been a move towards self-service return kiosks in different locations like malls and supermarkets that are multi-retailer in place. So it essentially consolidates some of those online returns that you would normally have, where you would ship them back in a box or go to mailboxes, et cetera, or UPS, or sending out in Europe, DHL, Deutsche Post, et cetera. And they have it at their local supermarkets, where you can put things into a kiosk and to a locker and do the return there, and then the supermarket takes it from there. In terms of policies, in terms of holding merchandise there, you've got Nordstrom, shoes are in quarantine for 72 hours. Macy's and Gap, everything for 24 hours. Kohl's has announced that all their merchandise for 24 hours, which brings up a major issue. How do you deal with the inventory? And how do you account for that inventory when it's in limbo? It's not able to be sold, but it's also not able to be taken off the books because it's a return. Do you have two sets of books? How do you handle that in terms of inventory when you have online sales and people want to come into the stores? Is that item showing in inventory? What about ship from store when you're getting clothing? Is that item in inventory? It opens up a great number of problems to an already area where retailers are losing money on every sale or every return, excuse me. And those things are in limbo, and you just don't know. That level of complexity is very tangible right now. And once again, in that complexity, there's a loss of margin that occurs there. We've also got policies now that the dressing rooms are closed. Why this is so critical is the fact that online apparel stores, the return rate for online apparel is roughly 50% when you can't try it on. In the stores, it's much lower. It's at 10 or 20% for returns there. Is our return rate now going to go more towards the online rate for clothing stores, which are already being hit the hardest? Because dressing rooms, people cannot try the merchandise on. What do you do if somebody tries it on? How long are you going to hold that merchandise there in the store? Is that in inventory or not in inventory there? What about the person who's just browsing and wants to feel the merchandise there and test it out? Do they have to buy it first before they can do that? So does all retail, so to speak, turn into an online-like experience when it comes to return rates? That is the big problem that we're gonna find out, and let's hope it doesn't go to that level. I mean, the CDC has certainly come out and said it's very unlikely for somebody to get transmission of COVID from a garment or a package or anything like that, even though in lab settings it shows it can last that long. However, for safety purposes, retailers are going to these extra lengths there, but it's a real challenge as you open up these stores. It's a very real challenge. Then you have the challenge of what do you do with the return when it comes back? Do you restock it in your inventory at the store? Does it go to a third party or a warehouse for evaluation? Does it go back to the manufacturer, or does it simply go to a liquidator? We've all heard stories in retail about how TJ Maxx is just flooded with people right now, and they've got the pick of the litter when it comes to things on the discount items and the liquidation items that will be coming from the higher end retailers into the Marshalls and TJ Maxx types of environments and Ross environment. That's a retailer that's going to have great opportunities. Then they're going to be massive sales as a result of that. But that piece of that decision process, is that optimized for you as a retailer? Have you got the reverse logistics piece of it optimized? Because those are particular areas with a lot of lost margin. The average margin lost for a return is about 5 points of margin, 6 points of margin for a department store. There, 5 points for a food, drug, mass merchant. That's if you're able to put the item back into stock. And so it's just the fact that you're handling it multiple times, the time it takes to do that, the repackaging, the relabeling of it, making sure there's not damage. Now we add cleaning to that. And there's a whole bunch of hidden areas where margin is lost. Whether it's, do you have the plan in place in the first place to be optimized? Are you having problem with return fraud? The NRF APRA study back in December showed fraud at 8 to 10% of total sales there. Big problem there. The chain of command of the merchandise. Once again, where are you sending that back? We're seeing now things that are courier services or delivery services like Instacart are now bringing back merchandise for returns for retailers in some locations. How do you handle the chain of command of that merchandise? How fast do you refund that customer? Once again, the inventory decision on that there. Do you have AI and machine learning involved with trying to make those decisions because of the number of items and the differences in those items? Do you have the staffing and training aside for the people that are there? Do you have people that know are going to be able to deal with people when you have conflicts with customers? Certainly that's taken on a huge issue now with what's going on in the world in terms of confrontations. That gets even bigger when you have angry customers in a retailer for a business perspective there. What are your policies there? Are you being sensitive to that, to the racial issues there that I'm sure you're trying to do anyway, but are you sensitive to that and extra sensitive to that? Do you have those policies in place? Often overlooked, have you optimized your carriers when you have to return things? So, or do you have opportunities with the FedEx, with the DHL, Deutsche Post, Jetpack around the world where those are optimized so you're getting the best rates for the right product size in terms of things? And have you overall optimized that reverse logistics process? These are all areas of where margin is lost in the process of returns. Why this is so critical, this is a study we did with RIS News, and it gets to the impact of the difference between leaders. The people that are growing their business 10% or more are 1.6 times more likely to have put in the processes and optimize their processes for returns. As you can see, it's larger even for click and collect and some of the other areas. But how much of that margin can you get back when you optimize that? And our study said that up to 70% of the margin points lost in food, drug, mass merchants can be recaptured if you've optimized all those steps we've talked about. In department stores, 83% of that margin can be recaptured in department stores and specialty stores as a result of optimizing all of those processes. And so with that, I'm going to take a breath. We just went through 73 slides in about 49 minutes, and we're going to open that up to questions. And I'm going to invite Lee and Jerry to come back in. So once again, you can ask questions down in the bottom right there, and I see several have come in because my screen's been blinking and distracting me the whole time. That comes through there. So Lee.
All right, I'll just start right from the top here. Concerning the Moody Analytics economist and his statement, he stated that the COVID-19 recession is over based on the latest ADP payroll data. Do you agree with that statement?
Nope. Next question.
What do you think the likelihood that more states will legalize cannabis and sports gambling as a result of the loss of tax revenues related to sales, restaurants, and tourism taxes?
I think it's a no-brainer as from a lot of these states to do this going forward, particularly the sports gambling one. I don't know if the cannabis one will be as fast there, but with the lost revenues, for instance, in the state of Tennessee, that may be a challenge for both of those in the state of Tennessee, but we have no state income tax. So if it comes down to doing a state income tax to make up lost revenues or legalizing those two things, I think it's going to push towards legalization, particularly the sports gambling. And quite frankly, if you look at the stock market today, there's no rhyme or reason or rationality to the stock market. That is gambling on a day-to-day basis. That I think you're better off going out there and rooting against the team that ESPN is hyping in college, and you're going to do better than picking stocks on a day-to-day basis.
The stock market is the matrix.
Yes.
We have a question here. What are the main actions a retailer can take to limit returns?
Generally, it's a plan up front. You've got to have the plan up front in terms of your items, but there's things. The biggest area of problems is having sizing and having adequate sizing of apparel. There, you're not going to eliminate all returns, but the fact that sizes, you have aspirational sizes in one retailer and you have different sizes in another, and a size 2 is a size 6 or size 8, a size 8 is a size 16 in a different retailer. The fact that we have all of these different policies and different things is a big deal. You being consistent with your merchandise and what it is for your labels, regardless of who the vendor is, and pushing that will go a great deal of moving to that direction and limiting returns.
Okay. Forrester states that online sales this year will rise from 19 to 21% of total USA retail sales. That number seems low. What's your view?
Jerry, you want to play with that one?
Yeah, actually, I was fortunate. I was able to kind of see that question come in early, so I pulled up a spreadsheet. But
I'm glad I picked you then, because I didn't know.
Yeah, it was fortuitous. I'm playing, but fortuitous. Yeah, and looking at that, looking at what we have two components of. So what we do to answer your question, I look at it from the two components of e-commerce. You have e-commerce that runs through brick and mortar stores, through their website, and then you have just pure play e-commerce that is applicable to general retail. And when you consider those two components, again, just looking at general retail, if we look at just those two components of e-commerce for store-based retailers and pure play e-commerce, yeah, we put that number in the high 20%. So even maybe low 30% bump this year. When we go look at all of retail, now you bring in bars and restaurants, you bring in grocery stores, drugstores, again, that brings those numbers down certainly somewhat, again, because we're still certainly maturing in the grocery space, but it is growing rapidly. So, but even overall, the 21% is probably a little low.
And I think one of the challenges that we don't know yet is what's going to stick. The online click and collect, online delivery, local delivery, those were up 300 to 400% for some retailers during the peak. How much of that is going to stick? Because the process wasn't that great for a lot of customers because of the level of out of stocks, which is actually gets us to our next webinar and research report will be on out of stocks. So Lee, and I'll switch that to that slide there. So I'll push that so we can.
Got a question here. There were differences in the Q1 results based upon how strict each retailer was on social distancing and limiting people inside of the stores. Do you think that continues in Q2? Let me take a stab at that. I think a lot of this is going to depend upon what types of stores you have and where they're located. In other words, if your stores are very small footprint and they are located in urban areas, then you're probably going to be, in a sense, locked down for a much longer time than most other folks. If your stores are tend to be located in rural areas and tend to be more open, like a Home Depot or a Lowe's or something like that, I think that period is going to be much shorter, and things are going to return to normal, or what we used to think of normal, much quicker. What are you guys' thoughts?
I think Best Buy is the one that concerns me the most right now, is the fact that they're still appointment only. I only do, if I need something, I look at them, and I look at, Staples, or I look at, Office Depot and some of the other places. And if I can go get it within an hour or just have it shipped, I'll go that route. But I keep waiting for Best Buy to be open, to be able to walk in where we are. Bars, restaurants, every other store is open, but our local Best Buy's not. So, yeah.
Okay. How do you think the pandemic will impact the use of cash as far as restaurants and stores go? The U.S. has many unbanked citizens, so more stores going cashless seems like it could present challenges. Thoughts?
Yeah. Unless you guys want to jump in there, there's no doubt that cashless has been one of the biggest areas of growth. Mobile payment, anything related to cashless purchases, regardless of the segment right now. However, you do run into that issue where you've got the unbanked, and we've had many retailers and restaurants try to go cashless, and local municipalities have come back and said, no, that's discriminatory. So this is really one of those areas where you have issues where COVID and the challenges we have with race and ethnicities come together there, and those are big problems that when we look at everything moving to cashless, I don't think it moves cash out of the stores there, because you're going to lose too many of those sales. But I do believe it's we're going to move to more cashless transactions there.
I'll toss this one out there. What are some specific tech investment recommendations you could make to optimize the returns process so you can recapture that loss margin?
Yeah, I think we talked about it. It's all those areas that that are those hidden the hidden areas there. So the plan in front, but certainly return fraud, that drops right to the bottom line there. And then particularly when you get down to the areas of optimizing your carriers and your reverse logistics process for things, that's the other big area there. Your staffing, your labor, and your training, you tend to have systems in place already for that, that you can leverage to optimize it. But the big areas that most people don't have in place is these optimization of the carriers. If it's an online sale, have you optimized how the return for that online sale would occur beforehand? Do you preempt that with your favorite shipper by putting a label in there? Do you force the customer to print their own shipping piece out? Those are factors that when you optimize it can drop many points of margin and make it more efficient.
I think you potentially have the opportunity also for AI to play a pretty significant role in reducing returns as well, where it learns your habits over time and can predict the colors that you like better, or more accurate sizing based upon your purchase history. we've heard some pretty interesting stories from vendors that are bringing AI into their recommendation engine, and they're seeing some improvement on the back end in the quantity of returns.
Okay, last question, Lee. I talked too long.
Okay, let me get a good one then. Do you see retailers leveraging COVID-19 in tightening their return policies?
It really depends on how you did during COVID-19. I can see, yes, the big box retailers that were up in certain categories 600%, like cleaning supplies and grocery stores and mass merchants and those big box retailers. I think there's an opportunity to make their policy stricter. I do not believe in fashion that you guys have that luxury, no pun intended, of being able to do that. The need for customers in the store and keeping those customers and handling that returns process right with grace with those customers is just too critical.
Yeah.
So.
And to finish that off, I don't think there would be a single retailer that would actually admit to that.
Oh, of course not. All right.
Not a chance.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining today. Thanks for taking the time. And once again, the recording and things will be up later today. Our next opportunity for something like this is going to be our inventory distortion paper and webinar called Disruptive Retail, How the Pandemic Exposed Retail's Hidden Inventory Distortion. If you tried to order online for things in the store that said they were in stock and then they were gone, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This research will size that and show opportunities for improving that for the next time. So it'll be broader than just the pandemic, but it'll talk about those things. So the deadline, if you want to be a part of that from a sponsorship, is on the 17th of this month. Thanks so much. You guys all stay safe out there.
Take care, guys.
Bye.